Okay, AP Euro students, welcome back to another lecture. This time we're going to look into the revolutions of 1848, and without me at the bottom there. The revolutions of 1848, sometimes called the springtime of the peoples of Europe, um, or other historians have referred to it as the turning point in European history that failed to turn. And here I think you see a wonderful poster depicting the revolution that broke out in France on February 22nd and 23rd and 24th. In 1848, and again that looks like the reminiscent of the 1830 revolution that broke out in Paris as well. And you can see yet again barricades. And by February 23rd, there were some 1,500 barricades in the streets of Paris to prevent the movement of the French royal troops, allowing the protesters and demonstrators to really kind of shut down the city and take control and express and vent their frustration with the government that they feel had failed them. So we're going to see the revolution spread throughout Europe, and it's really remarkable how widespread these revolutions were, in fact. So with that, we'll get started, and we see here the idea of street demonstrations that we saw in the previous slide, and we're going to see them pop up in Palermo, of all places. So King Ferdinand II in Palermo, Sicily. There was the first revolution in January of 1848 that spread to France in February of 1848, and later that spring, revolution would spread across much of Europe. And what was interesting is, as these revolutions spread, many nationalists from various parts of Europe who had been living in exile in London and in Paris and in Zurich return home and begin to launch challenges to the political status quo, that is, the conservative order that ruled much of Europe, and we're going to see that take place. So we're going to look at monarchs in Austria and Prussia and Piedmont, Savoy, and some of the German states clumsily attempt to suppress the rebellions by force. Yet the people in the streets had erected these barricades and launched really what are called street insurgencies. And this was sort of a new form of fighting that reminds one of the patriots in North America that fought the British Redcoats to a standstill and ultimately to victory by launching insurgency. We're going to see this also in South America that we're not really going to study all that much, but again, the idea of popular protest, people in the streets launching insurgencies, it really kind of reminds one of maybe what's going on today in the world as we look at Iraq, we look at Afghanistan, and other places where we find the United States encountering difficulties and challenges from insurgent movements. So, with that being said, you can look at this wonderful picture, this time a German picture, showing a barricade in Königsstrasse in March of 1848, March 19th. So here we're going to see that the monarchs, again, as I said, clumsily tried to suppress the rebellions, and they ultimately fail. And what they do is they yield to insurgent pressure by issuing or granting, as Louis XVIII did in 1814, more liberal constitutions that expand the electorate and recognize basic liberties and rights of citizens. So in this regard, it seemed as though Europe was poised to turn a corner. And again, that phrase of Europe was about to turn, yet it ultimately failed to turn. And here we see the king of Piedmont Savoy, Carlo Alberto, signing the liberal constitution of 1848. And this was going to repeat itself again across Europe. So it seemed like things were poised to do well. Now, let's take a look at the map. And I think the map of 1848 just shows how widespread. If you look at all the red sort of flashes there, you can see pretty much from Paris up to Ireland, to Denmark, to Prussia, to the Austrian Empire in multiple places, down to northern Italy in the Veneto and the Lombardy areas. You can see the Papal states, the Vatican and Rome, the Kingdom of Naples. You can go all the way over to Wallachia and Moldavia, present-day Romania, to see, again, these outbursts of revolutionary fervor and passion, including even the Republic of Krakow over there at the northern border of the Austrian Empire and the southern border of Poland. What you don't see, and I think is interesting, no revolutionary outburst in Great Britain, nor in the Russian Empire, and for that matter, Spain and Portugal, relatively quiet. So that's an interesting thing. Let's take a look at this. Austria and the Habsburg monarchy faced nationalist inspired insurrection. So here we see the idea of nationalism coming into play, and we're going to see Italians in the Veneto and the Lombardy regions rebelling against the Austrian presence. We see Czechs and Poles and South Slavs rising up in revolt against the Austrian Habsburgs in Central and the Balkans, and these ethnic national groups are really demanding independent states along national lines. And that's something we talked about when we looked into the idea of nationalism. We also see the Magyars in Hungary mobilizing to demand autonomy or independence from Austrian Habsburgs, and the Austrian liberals themselves demanded political reforms within the Austrian Empire, and German nationalists sought a unified Germany, something we saw German students and intellectuals and writers had launched in the post-Napoleonic period back in 1815 to 1819. We're also going to see, as I mentioned, Romanian nationalists rising up in revolt against the Ottoman Turks. Though Russia helped Turkey quell this rebellion, so it's rather interesting that in this case, unlike the case of Greek independence, we see Russia and its Tsar and the idea of the Holy Alliance now holding firm against further independence movements in that region of the world. In Britain, though there's no revolution, the Chartist movement came back with its demands of universal suffrage, and there was, again, widespread fear of an Irish uprising. In fact, there was agitation in Ireland to, again, assert its national identity and independence, or more home rule from Great Britain. We even see, not listed here or shown here, Sweden. The king appointed a more popular government. In Denmark, Danish liberals and nationalists forced the king to issue a liberal constitution in that nation. The Netherlands also had a new constitution in 1848, and popular pressure there forced the expansion of the electorate. So what we see then is, practically speaking, the entire map of Europe in some way, with the exception of Russia, again Spain and Portugal, being impacted by this wave of revolutionary passion and fervor. So we want to look into then the question of why so much revolutionary passion and fervor in 1848. And I think the answer is simple, and it's summed up in the title of Charles Dickens' novel, Hard Times. And we see that the 1840s, for much of the decade, economic hard times. There were many business failures, coupled with poor harvests. In particular, the worst of these food problems and food shortages occurred in Ireland from 1845 to 1851, and that's the famous potato blight that led to upwards of 1 million people starving to death, and of course causing mass migration from Ireland to other areas, in particular the United States. So the underlying conditions, that is the context that motivated liberals and nationalists and Republicans who wanted to form republics to challenge the conservative regimes that the Congress of Vienna had restored and sanctioned, was economic hard times and poor harvests. And we see that it's really the middle class that took up the popular dissatisfaction with the existing conservative status quo and forged movements that would produce social and political reforms that would ultimately benefit the middle class, the middling orders. And we see here then a new awareness of social class and order appear for the first time. Not really the first time, but it becomes evident that there is a class consciousness, that people are very much aware of their class and make decisions based on that. And we see, too, the publication of the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels in 1848 that clearly highlights this idea of very distinct class divisions that explain the movement and the forces at work that shape world history. So what we want to then look into, after having looked at this idea of the hard times in the 1840s as an explanation for things bubbling over in 1848, is what happens to these revolutions? Well, there's initial success, and as I said, many of the monarchs across Europe grant more liberal constitutions and yield to the pressures of street demonstrations organized by the middle class orders. Yet the liberals, the middle class itself, became divided, and it became divided into two groups: sort of the more mainstream liberals who wanted constitutional monarchy. They wanted an expansion of the electorate, but not full democracy. That would be radical. So what you see is the appearance of more radical strain of liberalism that makes demands along the lines of republics without kings, with universal manhood suffrage. That reminds us of the Chartist movement in England. And the liberals and the radicals are going to divide themselves. And I think this picture, this graphic, sort of shows that division. So while there were initial successes for these revolutions of 1848, we're going to see that this division between liberal elements and radical elements that appeared, and later socialist elements that will appear too, really allowed the conservatives time to regroup and to launch counter-revolutions that were ultimately going to be successful in sweeping away all the reforms that the liberals had won. So we can see that then these revolutions, while it seemed like things were going to turn in Europe, they don't turn. And again, that's because the conservatives come back in strength in most all of the areas of Europe, and we're going to see a restoration once again of conservative regimes and conservative ideas. And a key figure in this movement is going to be Tsar Nicholas, as I say there, Tsar Nick. He's the Holy Alliance savior who takes up his brother Tsar Alexander's idea of the conservative values and this Christian moral mission to restore order and balance and harmony in Europe based on tradition and the old order ideas. And that's really going to snuff out the revolutions of 1848. So Europe did not turn to a more liberal and a more democratic point in 1848. However, I think it's fair to say that the impact and the legacy of the revolutions of 1848, much like the French Revolution of 1789 to 1794, unleashed a new genie, and that was this middle class and more radical ideas are going to begin to circulate, and the conservatives are going to work very, very hard to sort of co-opt or cooperate with the middling orders to prevent the rise of more radical ideas. So over the course of 1850 to 1900, we're going to see that conservative regimes begin to make reforms or yield to reformist pressures in small part. We also see that the revolutions of 1848 are going to unleash forces that are going to lead to the creation of new national states, and that is national unity in the German areas and in the Italian peninsula. So I think it's fair to say that the revolutions of 1848, though they failed, are in fact quite significant for the course and the development of Europe and the map of Europe and even the ideas that are going to undergird European society, and that's going to be something that we're going to look at. So if there are any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.